Before Brazil played Japan in a World Cup knockout match, Zico was asked a question that should have been simple. He is Brazilian. He is Flamengo's greatest idol. He played 3 World Cups for Brazil. By 1982, he was the number 10 many Brazilians still remember. The thin frame, the free kick, the pass released only after the defender had committed his body. So when Brazil meets Japan, the side should be obvious. Zico said he would support Brazil. Then he added the part that changes the match. If Brazil wins, great. But if Brazil loses, he said, he will not be sad. In Japanese football, there is a little foot of the Coimbra family. That is where this game stops being clean. Brazil against Japan should look like 2 separate football stories meeting in Houston. Yellow against blue. One country carrying the oldest burden in the World Cup, the other carrying the confidence of a football nation that no longer arrives as a guest. But Japan's story is not empty of Brazil. It is not a borrowed style, nor an imitation. It is something quieter, a seed planted in the early professional years, when Japanese football was still trying to understand what it could become. And the Brazilian who helped plant it was Zico. He did not go to Japan as a young player looking for a career. He went after Flamengo, after Udinese, after Brazil, and after the 1982 team had already become one of the most loved disappointments in football history. In Brazil, Zico was already a memory before he left. He carried more than a reputation. He carried a way of making football feel legitimate before the environment around it had fully matured. When he joined Sumitomo Metal in 1991, the club that would become Kashima Antlers, Japanese football was standing at the edge of a new professional era. League had not yet begun. The country was trying to build clubs people could follow, stadiums that could hold a new public habit, and players who could grow inside a real professional structure. Clubs needed to feel less like company teams changing names, and more like places people could recognize themselves in. A league can be announced. A culture cannot. That was the space Zico entered. Kashima was not Tokyo. It was not Osaka. It was not an obvious capital of anything. The team came from a company background, from a place that needed football to create its own gravity. Then Zico arrived, and the project had a face that carried authority far beyond Japan. This is easy to misunderstand. It was not just the glamour of a Brazilian legend, nor a famous name placed on a new product. Zico treated the football seriously. In Kashima's opening J.League match in 1993, he scored a hat-trick against Nagoya Grampus 8. The image mattered because the league was still introducing itself to the country. Here was the new competition, still fresh and fragile, and at the center of one of its first great moments was a Brazilian who had once belonged to Flamengo and the Seleção. But goals were only the visible part. Zico brought a kind of football authority that Brazil often exports poorly in memory. From the outside, Brazilian football is reduced to joy, improvisation, and natural talent. The dribble travels easily. The smile travels easily. The myth of effortless genius travels most easily of all. What Zico carried was more demanding. Technique as daily work. Imagination as responsibility. The number 10 not as decoration, but as someone who gives shape to the players around him. In Kashima, his presence made skill look serious, not casual. It gave a young football culture a model of how beauty could live inside discipline. That is why his Japanese story does not sit neatly inside the idea of a late career star abroad. He was not simply extending his playing life. He was helping give weight to a club and to a league that still needed weight. Kashima absorbed that weight. The club became one of the central institutions of Japanese football, not because Zico alone built it, but because he arrived at the moment when symbols mattered. Supporters needed someone to believe in. Players needed standards they could see. The league needed proof that it was not pretending to be professional. Zico gave the project that proof in public. Then the relationship continued. He worked at Kashima after his playing career. Later, he coached Japan. Under him, Japan won the 2004 Asian Cup and reached the 2006 World Cup. And in Germany, the story folded back on itself. Japan played Brazil, with Zico on the Japanese bench. Brazil won 4-1. Ronaldo scored twice. The old hierarchy survived the night. The score did more than send Japan home. It made the distance between the teams look settled, even while Japan was still working on that distance somewhere else. At the time, it looked like confirmation. Brazil remained the teacher. Japan remained the country, still trying to close the gap. Zico stood between the two worlds, but the result seemed to put everything back in its expected place. The problem with football history is that results can hide what is still forming. Japan did not become a serious football nation in one match, or through one Brazilian. Its rise came through clubs, schools, coaching, investment, repetition, and the hard education of losing at World Cups and returning better prepared. Brazil was only one influence among many, but it was not a small one. Brazilian players helped fill the early J.League with credibility. Brazilian coaches and habits left marks across clubs, and Zico gave that relationship a human center. A Brazilian genius who did not only play in Japan, but asked Japanese football to treat itself as something serious. Now Brazil faces Japan again, and the distance no longer feels the same. Japan does not arrive as a charming outsider. Its players are used to European tempo, pressure, tactical detail, and the confidence of belonging in matches that once looked too large. They are not borrowing someone else's football identity. They have built their own. That is what makes the Brazilian trace more interesting. Japan did not become Brazilian. It took contact with Brazil, absorbed what it needed, mixed it with its own discipline and institutions, and turned it into something else. The influence survived because it stopped looking like imitation. So when Brazil looks across the pitch, it sees Japan. Modern Japan. Organized Japan. A team with its own frustrations, its own ambitions, and its own idea of what the next step should be. And underneath that, almost out of sight, there is still the image of Zico in Kashima. A Brazilian number 10 in a young league. A touch, a free kick, a standard. Not Brazil teaching forever, but Brazil leaving something behind that no longer belongs entirely to Brazil. That is the quiet tension of this match. Brazil once exported football authority to a place trying to build belief. Now part of that belief stands across the pitch, wearing blue.